Hi, in this episode of the Art Biz, I talk with art dealer Michael Findlay. He wrote the book Portrait of the Art Dealer as a Young Man, New York in the 60s. It's a very different interview for the Art Biz, but I really jumped at the chance to talk with him and his firsthand stories and experience with artists of that era. And I really also enjoy talking with him about how different the art world is today, how money has become so much a part of the collector's mindsets. So please enjoy this interview with Michael Findlay. Hi, Michael. Welcome to the Art Biz.
Alyson, I'm very happy and honored to be here.
You started your art collection young. Your first acquisitions were by mail order. And one of your first acquisitions was a real size or a full size reproduction of Franz Hall's The Laughing Cavalier. Tell our listeners about that.
You're just really starting at the beginning.
Yes, because it's a picture. It's a
No.
wonderful picture.
My first acquisition was a sixpenny postcard of Salvador Dali's John of the Cross.
Yes.
That, as a postcard, we won't count that. I sent away, because I'd seen an advertisement in a newspaper for this reproduction of The Laughing Cavalier, not because I had seen the original. I had yet to see the original. I think that I was convinced, probably because of clever marketing on the part of the National Gallery, that it was, quote, a famous painting. I'm not sure if I was totally captivated with the subject, but I was young, impressionable, and I suppose looking for something to brighten up my little room. So I sent away
And you
for it.
chose a Dutch painting to brighten up your room?
Well, I think he's holding a mug of beer and chuckling. You know, he is literally a laughing cavalier. And actually now, as I say that, I realize that some of my favorite paintings now are very late Picasso paintings of cavaliers, laughing or not. So obviously there's some thread in my psyche that has to do with cavaliers. So what impressed me about this is that it simulated oil on canvas because the paper was ridged. You know, this was some kind of new miracle process of printing they must have invented in 1953, probably in Wigan, Yorkshire. And so it had apparent texture, even though it was a flat reproduction. So I hung it above my bed so that everybody would see it when they came in my room, which would have only been my mother or my brother, one of my brothers. So it's not as if we had tours coming through my room. So, and it was unframed because it came rolled up in a tube. So I found some lavender colored, I want to say netting. My wife would know the right word for the kind of
Tulle.
Yes. And so I draped that around the top of it and I pinned it up. My bedroom was mostly made of beaver board, which is almost like, you know, you can push pins in it very easily. So I did that a lot as a child. So I was very proud of this. And I suppose it continued my interest.
I love the vision of the lavender netting around this full-size reproduction. It just is, like, I just love that. You called it postmodern.
Well, I'm thinking of David Hammons or some very conceptual artists now, you know, who might have recognized it.
Yeah. You also tried your luck as a dealer really early in your life. You were in Wimbledon Village and set out your artwork for sale.
Well, I had been to Trafalgar Square outside the National Gallery, and to this day, if you go there, you will see pavement artists who are extremely skilled using colored chalks making large reproductions of famous paintings as well as their own work. And I was fascinated because people were throwing not just copper but silver coins in the hats that they had there. And so when I came back home, I commandeered a friend who lived next door. And we very quickly, I mean, we didn't want to waste any time actually making art because we wanted to spend a lot of time selling it. So we made some large, probably watercolor drawings or paintings. And we sat on the pavement outside our respective houses. He lived next door. And we hoped that someone would, and we put a hat, obviously, out there. And we hoped people would come by and throw coins in it. But that didn't happen. What did happen was that the, I suppose, retired brigadier general who lived across the street threw open his window and bellowed loud enough for my mother to hear, "Are you boys begging?" So, and she was horrified by that. And that was the end of my first attempt to be, well, a combination of an artist and an art dealer. And it's a warning to artists who want to sell their own art on the pavement outside their house in a very, very quiet village.
Not a lot of art collectors walking by.
None, no.
I love that story. So when you were 11, you went off to boarding school. And I wonder if we could talk about the exercise that your art teacher, Mr. Anthony Kerr, had you do. You describe all of this, of course, in your book. This is what we're talking about. This is how I know all of these things. Portrait of the Art Dealer as a Young Man. Wonderful story, wonderful, colorful stories. Amazing memory. I can't even remember what I did last week. So amazing memory.
Oh, well, I can't either. But
These memories
I
are,
was young.
yeah.
I was impressionable.
So can we talk about that exercise that your art teacher had you do at the Tate and the National Gallery? I love it.
Well, the exercise that he made me and some of my fellow pupils do is really, as no secret, has been the basis for one of my other books about seeing, called Seeing Slowly, Looking at Modern Art, and a course that I used to teach at Christie's Education. And basically, his instructions were that we go and spend a morning or an afternoon at a particular museum, a major museum, that we select one work to look at that we felt drawn to, and to spend a reasonable amount of time looking at it. Today, we would say a reasonable amount of time might be 30 seconds. I think it should be 10 minutes. He thought it was maybe 30 minutes. And also maybe to take a look at something that we didn't like. Now, he didn't tell us to go and look at the Donatello or look at the Picasso or look at the this or look at the that. He was not interested in the date, the name of the artist, blah, blah, blah. No information. He wanted us to train our eyes. And what he required us to do when we came back into the classroom was simply to discuss what we'd seen in whatever language we wanted to use, but in a way to prove that we had really looked at it.
But you couldn't take notes. Isn't that right? You couldn't take notes.
No, couldn't take notes.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
no. We were supposed to absorb it, look at it, think about it, come back. And I mean, it would be the next day or the next after 2 days, why we liked it or why we didn't like it. And he himself was a very traditional painter. I mean, a kind of post-impressionist painter, a fairly good landscape painter, but he did not say, what he did not do was stand in front of a painting and say what the artist meant is, which I think is the most destructive form of art education. What he did was inspired us to find what we were drawn to and to find ways to express what we thought about it, particularly how it might have made us feel emotionally. To have in other words, to do what Duchamp urged us to do, which is to engage with the work of art, not engage with the information about it, but engage with the painting or the sculpture, or whatever it is itself. And that I mean, that was that pure and simple was my art education along the way, because I was lucky enough to get a job in an art gallery at a very early age, and one that had a fairly broad scope. I was privileged enough to be able to spend a lot of time looking at a lot of different types of works of art. So my eye did the work for me, my eye and my brain. But I don't believe you learn about art by reading, and I don't believe you learn about art by listening.
You learn.
I think you do by looking, as simple as
It's
that.
very hard. It's hard for me to even get my artists to look at their own art, which I insist will speak to them if they let it. And it's hard in this world where we're just so rushed and so distracted to get people to slow down. But what a gift to be able to do that. I used to do that when I worked at the art museum to have people look at art for long periods of time, but it is anathema to how we run our lives these days. It's so important.
Well, one of the things I think that nowadays happens, particularly with technology, and I've noticed this a lot at art fairs, people use their iPhone as a memory, and once they see a work of art that they think is interesting or important, they photograph it and they look at it through their iPhone, and then they turn and they look at their hand, at the picture that they've just taken, and then they look briefly at the real thing, and then they walk on. So they haven't really looked at it, and they've abrogated the responsibility for remembering it to the iPhone. I don't know how many people actually then scroll through everything that they've seen at an art fair, that they've taken photographs of, but it's a substitute, and it's actually a poor substitute, and it's no fun. It's just simply not fun, right?
Right.
The real thing is there in front of you. So somebody labored over that. Somebody, you talk to a lot of artists. How much time might someone have spent on making that? Hours, days, weeks, years, and you give it what? A click? Not very nice.
So, no, and it does go back to the lack of art education in our school. I believe we aren't trained to look as we're growing up. I had one professor in undergraduate school that really taught us to look, like drilled it into our heads because
Good.
he was a formalist. But formalism can only take you so far with art, right? I mean, there's a lot of work that can't be talked about in formalist sense, but I cherished that time with him because I didn't learn to do that anywhere else.
I have a friend who's a European curator, and he was schooled in Germany probably 25 years ago by professors who actually did not want their students to look at works of art. Everything was text. It was totally text
Oh,
based.
wow.
It was a philosophy at the time. It was a prevalent philosophy at the time. So, wow,
What a world opened up when he saw art.
yeah.
So, as you matured, you got a scholarship and that landed you in Toronto. And you started, it's a roundabout story where you were working with prominent Canadian art collectors, the Zacks.
It was coincidence. It was in those days, York University occupied an old mansion they'd been given in Rosedale. It's now a huge, huge campus. There were only 300 students in those days. And somebody suggested borrowing paintings from local collectors to hang on the walls. Contemporary paintings, not of great value. I think volunteered to do that with another student. And one of the doors that we were inspired to knock on, probably because they must have had some relationship to the university, was that of Sam and Ayala Zacks, who were very prominent collectors in Toronto at the time. And they had contemporary artists like Michael Snow, Jack Bush, that we borrowed for the campus, and also major sculpture by Matisse, paintings by, I think, Picasso, Miro. And they said, come on in and take a look. And that was the first time I entered the house of a private collector. But I mean, I don't know, 17 going on 18.
It's a privilege and eye-opening to visit homes of collectors on that level.
Yeah.
I know. You describe Ayala as epitomizing the best that an art collector can be. What makes a good art collector?
I think curiosity is probably the most important factor. Being open-minded. There are certainly collectors who delve deeply into specific periods in art history, and they wish to collect Renaissance sculpture or minimalism. And I think that is a very refined taste. There are other collectors who are broadly interested in modern or contemporary art. And what at least they used to do was go frequently to galleries, to go to museums a lot, to go to frequently to galleries, and not necessarily with the purpose always of shopping for acquisitions, but finding out what is going on and perhaps encountering something that they didn't know about that they might fall in love with. And this is the curiosity factor, which is that, I mean, later on when I was dealing in New York, I remember one instance where I had one client who was very interested and they wanted to buy, and I had one come in and look at a 1930s painting by Miro. But when they came in, they saw that I also had 2 or 3 paintings available by Jean Dubuffet, who was not an artist that they were that familiar with. And they came in to see one thing and they left with another, which means they were curious, they were open-minded, they didn't have a list, they had a generosity of spirit, and they were buying things, dare I say it, for personal enjoyment, buying things that they expected to keep, not sell. It's a strange old-fashioned way of doing business, isn't it? Or strange old-fashioned way of collecting. So Ayala was that type. I mean, I was learning from her, but I would imagine that if she walked into a gallery and the dealer said, I have a new painter called so-and-so, she would have said, well, I haven't heard of them. Show me. Whereas today, and I don't want to be too critical of my clients or other people's clients, sometimes if I mention an artist's name and it's unfamiliar, the collector might say, I haven't heard of them, and that's the end of the story.
Yeah.
In other words, therefore I'm not interested.
Right. Brushing them aside.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean,
Absolutely.
It's a different way of, and it comes down to self-confidence based on, I mean, I don't think you can become self-confident as a collector unless you've been doing it for long enough to have bought things you were enthusiastic about that you might tire of quickly, or bought things you were enthusiastic about that once you got them home, you became super enthusiastic about every time you saw them. So I don't believe there's a question of making a mistake. You know, collectors often now talk about, well, I bought so and so and I made a mistake. I think usually meaning they didn't go up in value.
Mhm.
Well, they might have made a mistake if they bought it without looking at it because it was a name that they were told to buy. That's a mistake.
Yeah, I want to go there, but I also want to tag onto what you're talking about, brushing aside people they've never heard of, because saw this in museum, and I think we continue to see this in museums where people go to the Mona Lisa, or they want to see the one work that they know because that's all they know. And it's not their fault. They didn't have an art education. They didn't know how to look at other things. And we don't teach curiosity. We just don't.
We're born with it. Children
Yes.
have it.
Yes, we don't
If
nurture it.
you take children into a museum,
Oh, they're
they will go to and start talking about things that catch their eye.
yeah.
And it's only when they get corrupted by lessons in art that have to do with dates and values and names of movements, and then it becomes boring or it becomes like algebra or something. One of the theories that I share with my wife is essentially art is play. All art is play. All art, the art of the most Rembrandt was play. Picasso is play. It's maybe a very refined source of playing. A child plays naturally and then they lose that sense, you know? It can be very serious, but it's still, um, I don't know, you put your finger on it about going to see the work of art that you're told other people like.
I do want to push back on the art history part of it because I fell in love with art history, and it's what really drew me in. I loved history, but what I know about as a former museum educator, I know that what happens is at a certain age, like 6th grade, kids begin to feel uncomfortable being wrong about things. And when they don't know about something, they don't ask about it. They're not they're no one's nurturing this openness and curiosity in them, and they shut down. And so they don't it's why adults don't want to it's why it's more fun to take a kid to a museum than an adult, because adult doesn't want to be wrong. They don't want to ask so-called dumb questions.
There is no dumb
There is no
question.
such thing, but
There's no dumb question. I tell my clients that
yeah.
they always say, well, now, Michael, this is a stupid
Mm,
question. I say, first of all, it's not.
no.
It's probably very germane, you know, like, why is he paint red?
Yeah.
Whatever it is, it's not dumb.
No, and aren't the most interesting people those that ask the good questions? They're really thinking about it.
And they're looking at
Yeah.
it. There is a huge intimidation factor, which I think continues to be cultivated, probably by the media constantly talking about things going for hundreds of millions of dollars at auction, you know. And I I think the information is very important. I would like the viewer to find the painting they liked and looked at and enjoy, and then look at the label because their curiosity is taking them to find out more. I'm not against the information. I just think that the information is a framework for the work of
Yeah.
art, but the work of art is kind of slightly ahead of its label.
Yeah.
Rather than people look at the label, if they don't know the name, they don't look at the painting. But if it says Rubens or Picasso or Basquiat or Warhol, they look at the painting.
And sometimes they look at the label for grounding, for something to relate to, like a title, like, "Oh, I know this place," or I know of this," and that label gives them grounding. It's because they don't know how to look at the work first. They just don't. And
Well, I'll tell them a dirty secret, which I think you will agree with, which that with notable exceptions, many paintings' titles have been put on by the artist dealers for means of cataloging and recognition. And many artists, Picasso in particular, never titled their work. I mean, they just, head of a woman, head of a woman, head of a woman. And so that's actually not going to help you, or it may even mislead
Well,
you.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. I just want people, and this is next to impossible, but people who are curious about art to have the confidence to spend that time with the work and ask not dumb questions. Ask any question they want.
Yeah, any questions they
Yeah.
want.
Yeah. So I do want to go to this line about collectors today. There were the collectors like the Zacks. There are still collectors like the Zacks. But what's your beef with collectors today?
I don't have a beef with I don't want to be the old guy that says things are what they used to be. Things are the way they are. We have the culture. What I describe in my book is a Stone Age culture, as far as most people who are, you know, I don't know, Gen Z. It's a Stone Age culture, and it's maybe fascinating, maybe it's boring. What we have today is we have the culture that we have collectors who are born culturally into the same world where almost everything is defined by its commercial value. It's how we define movies are great if they make $100 million. Books are great if they're bestsellers. So it's a different form of, well, it's a form of measurement. And can I quarrel with it? Well, it is what it is. It's not going to change. We're not going to go back because we're going to go forwards. Yeah. So I hope we'll go forwards. And now I'm going to sound like a socialist, to a time or type of art or a type of technology where contemporary, avant-garde, progressive art can be delivered to lots of people at the same time for very little money, and the artist still makes money. I would like to see that. And technology can do that. I don't know how or what it's going to look like, but I think there's a wave ahead of us which will perhaps compensate for the idea that if I make it expensive, it must be good now, right? That's just kind of an idea. I think good art deserves to be expensive, but I don't think you make it good by putting a big price tag
Right.
on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And artists who are working in interdisciplinary with video, with technology, they can deliver the same experience to 10,000 people at the same time. And they could all be paying, I don't know, 5 cents for that. And it adds up for the artist. But that's my socialist dream for the future.
Socialism allowed here. I guess we should tell people that you are sitting in your office at Aquavella Galleries, and where you are the director.
I'm a director.
You're a director.
Yes.
So you continue to be immersed in, after a stint at Christie's, you're back dealing.
Well, I retired from Christie's in 2000. I had been a dealer. With the years I describe in my memoir are the first few of 20 years that I spent as a dealer. Then I went to Christie's for 16 years, from age 39 to 50. And I retired from Christie's when I was 50, and I've been a director at Aquavella since 2000. So I sandwiched 16 years at an auction house between over 40 years as a dealer, doing what you do not do at an auction house, which is organize exhibitions, maybe represent artists, buy and sell. At an auction house, you're a broker, basically, and you don't do exhibitions, you don't represent artists.
What is the relationship now between dealer and artist compared to what it was like in the 60s?
Well, at Aquavella, it's not that different. We have a small number of artists, and we have each of us with different artists, we have a personal relationship with them. I mean, and things like exhibitions or prices are discussed by one of us as a principal and the artist themselves. That may be the case for a kind of a business model that's been going since the 19th century, era. I think that many galleries now, especially ones that have branches all over the world, represent, instead of representing a handful as we do, may represent 40 or 50 artists. They have 200 employees. Those artists, if they're successful, maybe have their own managers. They may have their own business managers out of the artist studio who discuss things with business managers designated in the, not in the auction house, in the gallery. So you have a new kind of system, which is very streamlined and business-like era. It is streamlined and business-like, and probably functions well when you're in boom times. So Aquavella adheres to, I would guess, a tried and true business model. It is a shop. It's a place where it sounds simplistic, but you can come in, we can show you works of art. You can choose to buy them or not yourself. And, we do social media marketing. I mean, we're up to date as far as all of that is concerned. But a lot of transactions now take place with a number of people in between the collector and the dealer. Between the collector and the artist.
Yeah.
Managers, advisors, consultants, lawyers. Lawyers play a very big role in the art world today. They were non-existent in the art world that I described in the book. And again, I'm not saying that was a good thing or a bad thing. That's just the case.
It occurred to me when I was reading your book, because I've read a lot of books about the contemporary art world, and I read as much about legal issues in the contemporary art world as I can. Not that I understand them all, but I'm fascinated by them. But it occurred to me that dealers today in New York, I'm talking about the New York art level, not here in Denver or the 95% of the rest of the galleries, but in the mega galleries and the larger galleries, that the gallerists might represent their collectors as much as they represent artists.
Well, that's a very astute observation. The dealers that I grew up wishing to emulate, let's put it that way, and that many of them are mentioned in my book, if they took on an artist, they took on that artist not only because of the work that they looked at in the studio, which may have been the artist's work when they're 25 or 30 or 35, but they took on that artist for what they were going to do, whatever it was going to be. In other words, they represented a person's talent as seen by the paintings in the studio, but also to have a commitment to be at their side as they moved forward as artists, right? So you had artists who were with dealers more or less lifelong, or they changed dealers a couple of times. I think that's quite different now. I think often when the dealer takes on an artist, and it may be with a very, very major financial commitment, it's because they feel they can sell those works that artist is doing now. And that they can call out their clients and say, you have to buy so-and-so because this young man, this young woman, whoever is the next, whatever. It's always bad to be the next Andy Warhol.
Right.
Andy Warhol wasn't the next anybody, but, they're always saying that. And if that artist may decide to change, they wake up in the middle of the night and they say, I'm tired of making squares. I want to make circles, right? And they rush at their dealer and say, I've had a eureka moment. I'm not going to make any more squares. And the dealer says, I'm selling your squares. Come on, you've got to keep making them because I've got 5 people waiting to pay $100,000 for each of your squares. I don't think that's necessarily a very healthy relationship. I mean, collectors never used to be owned by a particular dealer, and I don't think they are necessarily today, but they should go shopping. They should see lots of different things and make up their own minds. But are they making their minds up based on what they want to buy and take, what they can afford and buy and take home and enjoy, or what they think might be worth more tomorrow?
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong in hoping something you bought at a gallery will go up in value, but buying it because of that is a mistake.
Right. Well, 99% of the artists that I work with and that are probably listening to this podcast will never have work that goes up in value, which is a really hard thing to take because they don't have secondary markets and they will never have secondary markets.
I'm not so sure that's a bad thing. I think if an artist has a market where they're living, or however the market is, maybe they're selling things online, I don't know, where there is a steady supply of people who want to buy what they're doing now for reasonable enough prices that you don't have to be a billionaire to pay them, but they're enough to keep that artist being able to pay the rent or pay the school fees, that artist can do whatever they want. They're totally free. The only other people that are totally free are artists who are 80 or 70 or 80 or 90 who've had glorious careers. They can do what they want to do it. And sometimes the late work is stupendous because they're free of the market. They don't care. But if you don't have, if you're not aware of the secondary market kind of judging you, then every artist should be free to do exactly what they want and not be dictated to by the market or by a group of collectors or a dealer for that matter.
I couldn't agree more. And that's what I tell my artists is that, they get despondent that their work might not go up in value. And I say, no, people are buying your work because they love it and they want to live with it, not because they want to flip it the next time the market goes up.
Would they prefer their work be go into a warehouse?
Exactly. That's where it ends up.
In a tax-free zone, bought by collectors who don't want to pay sales tax or whatever.
Yeah.
Then it's a tangible asset. They're making, widgets for an industry.
Yeah, breaks my heart where that's ending up. Okay, I have 2 more questions.
Okay.
The first is, tell us your favorite Andy Warhol story. I know you have a lot to choose from.
I have to sanitize not to think about this. No, one that I do mention in the book, which I still think is pretty hilarious. It touches on a number of things. In the mid-60s, when I met him, he was pretty well known by that time because of the Campbell's soup cans and Marilyn Monroe. But one of the first things he said to me was, I've stopped painting. I'm not painting. I'm going to make movies. I'm just making movies. He said, and I want to make Hollywood movies. Well, he never could. He couldn't. He's not capable of. And that's a good thing. But a couple of years later, when I was fortunate enough to be living on the 3rd floor of a loft building south of Houston Street in Soho, I had a living space and I had a big open floor space, and I had gallery spaces on the 2 floors below. Andy knew where I was. He'd visited. I had parties. And he called me up one day and he said, can I use your living space, your living quarters for one day to shoot a movie? And I said, absolutely, no problem. And I had just hired a young man, we'll call him Todd. That was his name. I won't give you his last name. His parents were well-known art dealers. They had a prominent art gallery in Philadelphia. And his mother wanted him to experience some working in a gallery in New York. He was quite young. I'm guessing he was maybe 18 or 19. Terribly nice. The family was quite conservative. And Todd, this was maybe his first or second day, and he was plumped down at the front desk. This was a very rudimentary first iteration of galleries in Soho. So there were no young ladies in black behind laptops. There was a wooden desk, Todd behind it, and people, actually the doors were open to the street. It was a loading dock. Anyway, I said to him, this artist, Andy Warhol, is going to come by sometime today. And I tell him he can go straight up the stairs to the third floor and he's going to, shoot a movie and he'll be in and out. He won't be in the gallery at all. So Todd said, fine. I don't think there was anybody else. I don't know why I was away that day. I came back. Andy had come and gone. And Todd was in a state of great excitement. And he was practically quivering with excitement. And he had a smear of lipstick on and some badly drawn eyeshadow. And I said, Todd, what's happened? He said, oh, you can't believe it. You can't believe it. I got to play a dead transvestite in an Andy Warhol movie. And I thought, well, this is exactly what your mother wanted, right? Do when you came to New York to learn the art business, right? The corollary of that, which I must confess to, was that as, I guess, not as payment, but as a thank you, Andy had left 3 or 4 old-fashioned 35 millimeter cans, those flat round cans that real movies used to come in, and he'd signed each one. And I have no idea. I have no idea what happened to them.
No.
I'd moved so many times. I don't thought at the time they were nice souvenirs, but
Were they empty?
They were empty. Yes,
yeah.
they used them, and he thought, oh well, everybody liked to get him to sign CD, love signing stuff. So
love it.
Anyway,
I love it. Okay, Michael, my last question is, what's the next book?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not a proper writer. I'm a Sunday writer, so I don't think there's any more. I don't know. Well, maybe it'll have to be fiction.
Well, we're only at the 60s.
Oh no, you only get that. Listen, I will tell you. I don't know. You're not old enough to remember the Profumo scandal in London, where in the 60s, where the government came down because the Minister of Defense, John Profumo, had naughty parties at his house with 2 very famous young women. Christine Keeler was one of them, and Mandy Rice Davis was the other. And they became tabloid fodder. They were known as escorts, if that's a polite word. Mandy Rice Davis has survived to this day and become something of a celebrity. She goes on TV shows, and she described her life recently as a long, slow descent into respectability. So I like to quote that and steal that from her. So there are no books about respectability.
There are not.
I'm not writing another one.
Got it. Michael, thank you so much for sharing your story. I know people are going to love the book. I look forward to sharing this
Thank you
with
very much. It's been a great pleasure.
Hey, thanks for watching this interview with Michael Findlay. I hope you really enjoyed it. And if you'd ever rather listen to the podcast or read it rather than watch it here on YouTube, I hope you'll check it out at artbizpodcast.com. Thank you for inviting me into your artist life.